Hey everybody, Vikesroll here. I decided to do a patch notes review video, so I'm going to review patch 3.6, which is just coming out April 27th. And so I'll kind of talk through the card changes, kind of what my thoughts are on them, and just kind of how they affect different decks, and kind of whether I think they're a good change or not. So a lot of different changes in this patch 3.6, so I figured I'd kind of take my time and go through them. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so let's talk first about the new cards. So first one here we've got is Might of the Vanguard. So a new elite focused card, elite support. So to play, you spend all of your mana, you summon a Dauntless Vanguard and grow its stats up to that amount that you spent. And then if 9 plus mana has been spent, you grant other allied elites +2/+2. So it's got a quick little video here to kind of show you when it's played. So you play it, you're spending all your mana. So in this case, you're spending 9 mana. So you get the elite, it grows it up +6, and then you gain +2/+2 to all your elites. So that's kind of how that works. So I think it's a decent card. It's going to work well in elites, obviously. It's kind of a way to spend a lot of your mana and get a good buff to your board. So you don't feel bad playing this for a high amount of mana because it can boost up your board. So I think overall it's a pretty good card. I think the Elites deck is a lot more playable now with some of these supports, some of the changes like to Garen, which we'll go through. So I think it's pretty good. We'll have to see if that granting other allies elites +2/+2 is broken or not. It seems like it could be pretty strong in the right situations, but overall I think it's a pretty good card. Alright, next one is For Glory. So 6 mana slow speed. Reputation it costs 3, summon 2 Trifarian Glory Seekers. So this one, I'm not sure how good this card really is. So the Glory Seekers are, that the 2 mana 5/1 challengers which can't block, right? So you're spending 6 mana for 4 mana, which it's not horrible because you're able to do it right away, and so it's not the worst payoff in the world. But getting it down to the Reputation 3, obviously that's really great because you're spending 3 mana to summon 2 units worth 4 mana. But whether you're able to get the Reputation triggered early enough remains to be seen. Because typically the Glory Seekers, you want those kind of down the early to mid game to kind of take away your opponent's threats and kind of help remove the board. So coming down a little bit later when you've activated Reputation may not be as useful. But then again, with a lot of the buffs to Reputation, with LeBlanc changes, for instance, so that's kind of what this is, part of her support package. Maybe Reputation is a little bit stronger now. Maybe you're able to activate this a little bit faster. So I could see this being good in the right deck. I don't think overall this is a really playable card right off the bat, but we'll have to wait and see how the deck how this Reputation style decks perform. All right, so there's the video for that one. Next one, Inner Beast. So 2 mana burst speed spell for Freljord. Give an ally +1/+1 this round, and then create a stance swap in hand. So I think this is a pretty good card. 2 mana, giving yourself a +1/+1 is pretty nice, and then the stance swap is also really handy. So I think this is a very playable card. If you think about it from your Freljord perspective, you've got things like Troll Chant, which gives you +2 health, and then also um, puts an enemy down -2 attack. Is kind of in this similar vein, and then you've got things like Elixir of Iron, which is 1 mana burst speed with 2 health. So it's kind of right in that range. I don't think it's too understated for 2 costs, but then getting that free stance swap is also kind of nice. So I think it's a pretty good card overall. Alright, and then now we're on to the card updates. So those were the 3 new cards, and then now it's got some different champions and other related cards that have been changed. Alright, so the first one is Ashe. So she receives a buff to where instead of her level up condition being you frostbitten 4+ enemies, you've decreased 4+ enemies power to 0. So again, there's a couple different things, like Troll Chants or any other thing, even like Exhaust, which can give you negative attack to an enemy. So there are different situations where this does apply. I don't think it's really going to be much to push her over the top. Most of the Ashe decks were centered around the Frostbite, and because Freljord, has so many access to Frostbites, especially really cheap ones, like Brittle Steel, for instance, Flash Freeze, And of course, even on her attack effect, I don't really think this is going to be much of a major change to how she's played or how well she does, but it's definitely a little bit of a buff. So definitely makes her better. Whether it's enough to push her into the meta remains to be seen. But of course, she does pair well with LeBlanc, who also got buffed, so maybe that deck now is a little bit stronger overall. So we'll get to LeBlanc in a minute. All right, the Darius change. Really, this is just a Path of Champions change. So instead of going, I've seen the enemy Nexus have 10 or less health. I've seen the enemy Nexus have half its starting health. So for Path of Champions, this helps against certain opponents where their starting Nexus health was below 20. But as far as the PvP, there's no effect at all, no change at all. So really not even a buff at all. So all right, next Galio is level 2. His base stats go from 09 to 010, so he gains a little bit more health. It's nice. I don't think it's really that big of a difference. I think Galio's in a pretty decent place right now. So, overall, again, positive change, but I don't think it's that groundbreaking of a change. All right, next one we've got is Garen. So he goes from having just regeneration to now he has, when I'm summoned, give other allies +1/+1 this round. So I think it's a pretty strong change. I think Garen was already, in Elite's base decks, obviously he's the champion you play with that, and I think he's decent in that. And this just gives him a little bit of added boost. So buffing all your board, which is kind of what the Elites want to do, have a big, strong board, is pretty strong. So I think this puts him in a really good spot. And of course, he keeps that on his level 2 as well with that effect. So I think that's going to be really nice to help create favorable trades on the turn he comes down, and then you can kind of control the board a little better. So I think it's a good change for him. I think it makes him a pretty decent unit now, or excuse me, very decent champion now. And of course, with the other elite changes, I think the elites should be back in the meta, at least as a tier 3, tier 2 deck. All right, next is Karma. So her new effect is that when she's enlightened, she also continues to create the random spells from her regions in hand. So typically, or excuse me, originally, she lost that ability once she got to her enlightened. She just doubled the spells. So now she continues to double the spells, but now she continues to create those random spells. I don't think it's a huge change again. It's kind of nice to have those extra spells sometimes, but again, sometimes Karma decks tend to have clunky hands, and they're trying to get rid of spells. Like, Karma's flipped card, when you've got an extra Karma in hand, already creates you 4 cards when you play that. So a lot of times, Karma decks can have trouble even just filling out their hand. So in some situations it can be good, but other situations it can be kind of bad if you're getting these random cards rather than cards from your deck, especially if you end up getting to 10 cards in your hand before you draw. So it is a buff, but it's also not always going to be a great thing. So again, kind of a very small effect. I don't see it being that big of an impact on Karma's playability. Next one is Katarina. So she goes on to her level 2 effect to where she creates a 0-cost fleeting Blade's Edge in hand. So that is really nice. Again, I don't think it's a huge change as far as her playability for Katarina, but having that effect, basically it's her level 1 effect, now sticks around for level 2. I think it's nice. It's definitely a good quality of life change, makes her a little bit better. Again, I don't think it's going to push her into the meta, so to speak, and have her be, in a tier 1 or tier 2 deck, but it is nice, and it's kind of makes it more fun to play. Very similar change to Karma, to where they're not losing that level 1 effect when they level up. So, all right. Next change is LeBlanc. So her new effect is when she levels up, she also creates a mirror image hand. It used to be she had to deal 15 plus damage, so you'd have to have her alive to level up for 15 damage, then have to do 15 more damage just to see the first mirror image. So it was very hard to keep her alive, especially with the 2 health from her level 1 form. So this gives you more of a chance to actually see the mirror image and actually use it. So I think it's a good change again. It makes her better, obviously. I think it can push this deck a little bit higher into the tier rankings now, because you have that mirror image being played earlier in the game. You actually get value from that. You're not having to wait until very often when you actually got the mirror image in hand, you're already doing enough damage to win the game at that point. So it's kind of like a win more card, which is now it can actually give you a little bit more value when you're fighting for the board or fighting to win the game. So I think it's a pretty good change there. Definitely makes her stronger, quite a bit stronger. Next one is Leona. So her level 2 form now has Overwhelm as a keyword. So this one is a very underwhelming change, in my opinion. I don't think this really does much for her. She's only got 4 attack on her level 2 form, so I mean, obviously you can buff her and stuff, so there are ways to take advantage of it, but I think by default it's really not doing much to her and not really helping her that much. I guess you do push a little bit more damage, but I think if she had more attack, or if there were more decks that were centered around buffing, like the Leona, which maybe these could come up. I guess that's could be a new archetype that comes up. Daybreak's already pretty decent though. It's not really that bad of a deck right now. I think it needs a few more cards to kind of push it over the top to really make it a really viable deck. But so this is a small change, makes Leona a little bit better, but I don't think it really has that big of an impact on the meta. All right, next one is Malphite. So Malphite now gains on both his level 1 and level 2 form on a play effect where he stuns an enemy. I think it's a really good change. I think it's a really strong change for Malphite. Because not only if he's level 1, it was really hard to play him because he's cost 7 mana, and if it's like he just doesn't really do anything. He kind of just he comes down on the board. I mean, if your opponent's got like elusive attack or something like that, or they got a big wide board, he kind of felt bad to play him. So now he stuns an enemy. So not only does he be effective as a blocker, but now he's taken away an enemy from either attacking or blocking. So it just feels a lot better to play him. It's kind of more of a 2-for-1 rather than a 1-for-1 with a big stat that sometimes your opponent could just go right past. So I think that's really strong. And then of course his level 2 form having that is nice as well. So you could basically play him and then already get one stunned unit. And then a lot of times, your opponent would want to wait for that unstoppable force to come down before they would start playing out their other units. And so now you're already getting at least one stunned unit on play. So I think it's overall a really positive change. I think it makes Malphite a lot better having this effect now. Basically, it's the Arachnoid Sentry effect. All right, next is Nasus. So he gains a new keyword on his level 1 ability, Fearsome, which he already had it a while back. I don't think it's a huge change again. I don't think this really makes much difference for Nasus. Obviously not being able to be chump blocked is kind of nice, but typically you're wanting him to be attacking when he's got the 10 attack or more. So, I think it's a good change. Obviously, it makes it better. And so when I say it's a good change, like it makes a positive change for him, but I don't think it really makes him that much more playable. I don't think it's going to be that very impactful for this change here. All right, next one is Nocturne. So the change is now when you summon a unit, you give enemies -1, -0 this round instead of just when you play a unit. So things like Vile Feast or any type of just summon effects that are not playing a unit from your hand, like from spells, will now trigger the Nocturne, or even really just any type of summon effect will trigger this, which is good. It's a quality of life change, but it's not going to really be that impactful. I don't think it really makes Nightfall that much, or this Nightfall deck much better. And Nightfall's already pretty good, I think, overall. It's not a tier 1 deck, but definitely certainly in the tier 2 range, in my opinion. So it's, again, another quality of life change, makes it a little bit better, having that additional summon ability to give enemies -1, -0, but I don't think it's really going to be that big of a change. All right, next one is Scion. So he goes from 1 attack in level 1 to 2 attack, and of course, so basically he's 1 attack boost per level, including his return form. Again, makes Scion a little bit better. I don't think it really puts him too far into the meta. I think he's kind of was always, of course, before he got nerfed, he was just taking over the meta. So I think it's made it better to where kind of in the middle of what it was, the nerf that he had versus what his original form is, kind of right in the middle. So it makes it a little more playable, a little better. Time will tell if this makes it too strong, but I think it's a pretty good change in terms of power level. I don't think he's too strong. I think this will be good, kind of right in the middle of where he was originally versus what he was after the nerf, and then kind of putting him right back in the middle. I think that'll be good. All right, now Udyr. So Udyr is the one that had the biggest change, I think, of all the champions. So they changed his level up conditions. So instead of If you damage the enemy Nexus 7+ times, it's now you've played the stance swap 3+ times this game. He also gains 1 attack in his level 1 and level 2 forms. I don't think the 1 attack really is doing much difference for him. I think the level up condition makes more sense thematically. Um, Whether it's easier to do, maybe. Maybe it is a little bit easier to achieve this one. Um, the problem is a lot of those stance swaps, if you're not discounted, they're cost 30 mana. So it's a lot of mana to invest if you don't have them reduced to that 0 cost. So it's not often you're going to be able to do this by turn 5. In fact, I'd say very rarely you'll have that achieved. So typically he's still going to have to wait a little bit before it comes down if you want to have him leveled up. But I do think it makes sense to have him tied to the stance swaps for his level up. So I do like that change. It makes more sense thematically, especially. I don't think Udyr's still very good. I think he's still probably one of the lower tier champions. But again, I think they're making him a little bit better, and this may not even be the final rework we see for him. All right. And then our next one is Vladimir. So he gains Fearsome, very similar to Nasus. That's the new change for him on both his level 1 and level 2 forms. Helps him deal with chump blockers, right? I don't think it's really going to change whether he's played or not, because typically you're playing Vladimir in a Scargrounds deck, which is very kind of pigeonholed in that, where you really need to get Scargrounds going to really have a chance with the Vladimir style decks. So I don't think it really puts him in the meta. But again, it's making him slightly better. Can't be chump blocked now, which is nice, but I don't think it really has a big impact on the meta at all. Alright, so now we'll go through the follower spells and landmarks. So Ambush got nerfed from 2 cost to 3 costs, so I think it's a pretty strong nerf in terms of the playability of this card. I don't think this card is really going to see much play now. There's already the other PNZ card, the 2 mana Grants an Ally Elusive. I think that card just replaces the Ambush now. Having that extra +2/+0 is not really as good if it's with that conditional elusive, because elusive is really what you need for this. The +2/+0 is just kind of the added bonus. So I think a lot of decks that would play ambush would go to I think it's the Sumpwork map, I think is what it's called. I think that's going to be played over with this now. I don't think there's much reason to play ambush at 3 costs. All right. Ballistic Bot, so this goes nerf from a 1/3 to 0/3. I don't think this is really that impactful of a change for like Victor decks or other decks that are really just playing a ton of created cards and really boosting the Ballistic Bot up. I don't think it affects it that much. It hurts some decks that use the Ballistic Bot as like a chump blocker, like Fiznami, those kind of decks where you're need the Ballistic Bot to help kind of block and kind of help you survive. So that kind of hurts it a little bit. But as far as like the Victor decks, I don't think it really has much of a difference. I think if they had gone from 3 health to 2 health, that would have been a bigger change. But the 3 health to me doesn't seem like much of or going from 0 down to 0 attack doesn't really seem like much of a change. I think it's still going to be fine in like a Victor style deck. But I think any other decks that are not playing like Victor will kind of drop Ballistic Bot because it's just not worth playing if you can't really use them as a chump blocker. All right, next card is Blood for Blood. So it goes from fast speed to burst speed. So I don't think this is really that impactful of a change because in terms of the card seeing play, I still think the cards, it's pretty much just a worse iterative improvement, right? So because you got to deal 1 to an allied follower. It'd be nice if you could do this to like an enemy unit, for example, enemy follower, make it a little bit more flexible in terms of what you want to do with it. But it's definitely better as a burst speed versus fast speed, so it is a buff, but I don't know if it's really going to see much more play than it already was, which was very little play. All right, Sundisk. So the Buried Sundisk goes from when an Ascendant ally levels up for 10 rounds to 9 rounds. So it gets nerfed by 1 round. So basically, this should, in effect, prevent Mono Shurima from activating both their champions and restoring the Sundisk as early as they were. So it should slow them down at least 1 or 2 rounds in order to get them fully restored on the Sundisk. So I think it's definitely a good change because it doesn't destroy the deck, but it's also making them more vulnerable to aggro decks. So a lot of times Mono Shurima was still beating aggro decks just because they could go so quickly and advance their Sundisk so quickly that it didn't really matter that they had to that the aggro decks were getting to them because they could survive just long enough to get flipped, and then once it's flipped, it's very hard for them to lose. So this will make it to where their bad matchups are a little bit worse for them, which I think is good. It makes Sundisk a little bit harder to just be like an auto win when you're playing Mono Shreema. You're not just seeing, obviously you're still good against mid range and control decks, but now against aggro you're much weaker, which I think is a good change for sure. All right, next one is Callous Bonecrusher. So he goes from Reputation I cost 2 to now Reputation I cost 3, and when I'm summoned, grant me Overwhelm. So I think it's a good change here. 3 mana, 6/4 Overwhelm is pretty good. It does require you to have that activation for Reputation, so that does still mean you're not gonna have him early game, or within turn 3 or 4. But overall, I think it's a pretty good change. Units with Overwhelm, especially 6 attack, is really good. It's right in line with Ruin Runner and some of those other cards that have Overwhelm. It's even a little bit stronger than something like Renekton for 4 mana, right? But it does require you to already activate the Reputation to get the Overwhelm proc. So that's kind of a pretty good balance there. Could be good in like a Sivir, LeBlanc type style of deck, something like that. So I could see him seeing a little bit of play. Definitely, I think he'll be experimented with a little bit. All right, next one is Hyara Allseer. So change is when summoned, create a stance weapon hand. It costs 0 this round. 2, when I'm summoned, create a stance weapon hand. The first stance you play each round costs 0. So now it's repeatable effect every round, as long as Hyara Allseer is on the board. So I think it's a pretty good effect. The 6 mana is pretty expensive for this type of support. It also requires you to also be generating these stance swaps. So I think it's still pretty good in terms of, like, if you have an Udyr deck, do you want to play it? I think you probably do want to at least try having maybe 1 or 2 copies of this. I don't know if the 6 cost and being a 5/5 is really going to be able to justify it. I mean, it's hard to remove, I guess, but you're spending a lot of mana for something like that. That kind of by itself doesn't really do much. It needs to have those stance swaps. So I think it's it's a good change. I think I don't know if it's still like that playable of a card, but it's definitely more playable now than it was before. All right, next card is Swiftwing Lancer. So it goes from no subtype to elite. I think it's a decent change. Getting the elite keyword, or excuse me, the elite tag is nice, but when you think about this compared to Screeching Dragon, I still think you want Screeching Dragon over this. That's kind of why Swiftwing Lancer isn't really played, because Screeching Dragon is just so much better as a 4/5 challenger with the Fury. It's just a lot better than this. So I still don't think it's going to see that much play. I mean, I guess if you're playing an elite deck, then yeah, I guess it's nice. Makes a nice inclusion there. But outside of elites, I don't think there's still any reason to play this over your Screeching Dragon if you wanted a 5-drop challenger. So. All right, next is Bandle Tree. So cost is reduced to 4, and then the new effect is you need to see units from 10 region summons in order to win the game. So this is a huge nerf to this. I think the card's basically dead. I don't see it being played at all, really. I think, I'm not always a fan of completely nerfing something in the ground. I know people didn't really like playing against Bandle Tree. I can see why. It's sometimes not fun to have that, lower interactivity, but they said they didn't want to completely burn the tree down, but I think they kind of did at this point. I think maybe you put it at 3 mana, then it's maybe still playable. At this point, I think for 4 mana even, the only reason you play it is something like Yordles In Arms deck where you want like value generator, maybe. That's the only thing I can think of to where you play it. I don't think you can really count on that win condition ever working at this point now. So overall, I think it's huge nerf. I think it really destroys the card completely. So I don't think we'll see Bandle Tree much at all. All right, next we've got Vanguard Squire. So cost goes from 4 to 3. It's a nice change in terms of playability. I think it's still, for an elite deck, I think you still would include it even before, even if without that change. So it makes it a little bit more playable. Get 2 elites down, so 1 mana, 3/3, which, hey, that's great. Great stat line. So overall, I think it's a good change. I think it's pretty fair change for this. So definitely seeing a lot of elite support in this patch. So I think that'll be much more common deck now. All right, next one is Yordles In Arms. So This change is now, instead of your 4+ regions giving allies +4/+4, it gives them +3/3 instead. So, definitely a nerf here. Definitely makes the card a little worse. It's still a little bit better than you can think of 4 Demacia as a 6 mana +3/+3 slow. So this is still a little bit cheaper once you've activated that at 5 mana, but now it's not as broken as it was before. So I think Yordles In Arms still is playable as a deck and as a card in that deck, but obviously it's toned down a little bit more. So I think it's a good change overall. Alright, next one, Dragon's Protection. So this goes from a slow speed to focus speed, so grants an ally +0/+3. I think it's a pretty good change. I don't think it's really going to be that impactful again. Twin Disciplines is already, a better version of this, right? Because you get the flexibility of either giving them 2 attack or 3 health, but that's just for the turn. So this is a granting it. So there's some trade-offs there, but so being focus speed I think is really not as good for a health item, because you typically want to be playing these health boosts reacting to your opponent, to what your opponent's doing. So in that way, it's still not great as focus speed, but it's much better than a slow speed for sure. So I do think it's a better change. I don't know if it's really going to still see any play, but for sure it's a lot better focus versus slow. Alright, next is Shadow Apprentice. So changes when I'm summoned, you have loose ephemeral ally grant me +1/+1 to now when you summon an ephemeral ally grant me +1/+0 this round. So it basically can get boosted up. It's an elusive attacker, which is nice. So very similar to the 2/1 that grows. I'm blanking on the name of it. The 2-man 2/1 elusive that grows when you summon an ally. So very similar effect to that, but it's with ephemerals. The problem is ephemerals are really bad right now, so you're not really gaining. This. I guess you could play this in like some Hecarim type of deck, maybe. And of course, a 1-mana elusive attacker can be broken in certain situations. So there's never, you never say never with that. But because it's tied to ephemeral allies, I think it makes it not a great card overall. I don't think it'll see that much play. But in the right ephemeral deck, I can see this being a broken card if you're able to get some nice combos going. So definitely more playable than it was before, for sure. Alright, and next we've got some game rules updates. So they've got some visual UX improvements as well as game rules, so we'll go through those. So these are kind of controversial. So the first one is Burst Pass. So previously you could only end the round after your opponent has fully passed without taking action. Beginning this patch, if your opponent passes after playing only a burst or focus spell, you may now end the round. So basically you can no longer play like a prank, for instance, and then pass, and then your opponent would, if they passed, it would come back to you, right? Because it was just, you just played a burst or focus spell. But now, if you were to do that, your opponent can just end the round. They don't have to play any, or they don't have to give you priority back. So, I can see why they did it. I don't really like it as far as a gameplay effect, because I feel like it's a very skill intensive mechanic, if you will, to know when to burst pass, and kind of you're able to use it to kind of gain more information. Like you kind of non-commit, like you play like a gem on a unit and then pass, and then okay, your opponent has to do something now, right? And then you can react to them. So it creates a lot more skillful gameplay, in my opinion. If you have this mechanic in the game, I can see why they didn't want to do that, because they want to have it to where, you're really, I mean, it says right here why, more consistent gameplay, higher stake decisions, and then reaches empty and unstraight pass backs. So I can see the justification for it. I don't think it's a good change, but after a while, who knows? After a couple weeks, a month or so, we may think this is a great change, or we may wonder why we ever had it the other way. But from just my initial impressions, I don't really like the change. I think it makes kind of takes some of the skill out of burst passing out of the game, which I think is a bad thing. But time will tell whether it's a good change or not. And then the next one we're making, or next changes we're making, is change to cast. So it's merging with play. So basically, the definition of play in LOR is when a card leaves your hand into play or onto the stack that's playing a card. So cast cards have been adjusted to activate when you play a card. So now targeting now activates when you play a card. So you can think of things like Ezreal. So previously, his level 2 form, in order to get his effect where it deals 1 damage to the enemy Nexus when you play a spell, or 2 if you target an enemy, card that you play, the spell that you play has to resolve first. So you could deny it or destroy the target or whatever, and then it would fizzle, and then Ezreal wouldn't get the proc. But now Ezreal procs once you commit the effect to the stack. So there's a lot of different changes like this, like Lux and Jace are affected by this. Things like Heimerdinger are affected by this as well, to where now once you've played that card and you accept the action, you're gaining that effect now from those cards. So it's a huge buff to a lot of cards. I think overall it's going to be a major gameplay change to kind of deal with this. I think there's going to be a lot of different changes they're going to have to make to kind of get around this for some of these cards. I think there's going to be some cards that are going to get really, really strong from this. I think Ezreal is one of those that right off the bat, I think a lot of people think he'll be really strong, and I can definitely agree with that as well. So it's a major change, and I think overall, whether I think it's a good change or bad, I think it would have been better to have it the opposite way, to where the effect needs to resolve in order for the card to count as being played. That's my personal opinion. I think that adds more interactivity if you do that way, but I get why they didn't want to do that, because it feels better when you play a card knowing that that effect is going to go through. It's not as good when you're the opponent in that situation, right? But if you're the player, it feels better when, like, you've got a Heimer on board, you play a spell, and you're getting that mech, right? That little turret guy, right? Like, it feels better to do that rather than having it be denied, then you don't get it. I can see why they did it. I think I would have gone the opposite way, make it more interactive, make it to where you have to have it resolved before you get these triggers, the play trigger. But we'll have to see how this goes. I think it is good that they have clarified this and are making it just one concept. I think that's a good change for sure, because you're no longer having to know a difference between cast and play, which is a very it's just kind of like very tough for a new player, especially, to really understand these changes or the differences. And so this will be better for new players, I think, in a big way. But I do think it's not the right direction. I think they should have gone to the more interactive direction. But we'll have to see how this shakes out. Again, maybe in a couple weeks, couple months, we'll think this is a great change. So only time will tell there. All right, and then they're also making a few different visual effect updates, which I won't really go through, but just more clarity to the board. You've got like more indicators for the stat clarity, attack and blocker, attacker, and blocking chevrons. So, which is nice. I've never really been a huge the UX change was great, but I think it's nice. It's more clarity. I think it's better for new players, so I think that's a good thing. All right. So yeah, that's gonna do it for the patch notes. The rest is just kind of some of the skins and new emotes and stuff like that. But overall, I think the patch it's definitely a patch in the right direction. I don't think it's necessarily like the huge, amazing patch like a lot of people hyped it up to be. I think most of the changes to the champions are really minor. I don't think there's really too many that are like hugely impactful in terms of like, oh, this deck becomes a tier 1 deck. I do think the rules changes are pretty big. I think those are really impactful for a lot of decks. So I think it's still a positive patch. I don't think it was as good as it could have been. I think there's a lot more changes, especially to some of these champions that they could have done. But overall, I think it's a step in the right direction. So, yeah, anyways, I think I'm happy with the patch. Definitely excited to see what kind of new decks are able to come out of this. And of course, I'll be continuing to make more deck videos as we go. All right, so yeah, definitely give me your thoughts on the patch, what you think of it. If you thought the changes were positive, if there's things you thought should have been included or not, what you thought about the nerfs as well, and kind of how you're feeling about the game. All right, everybody, we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Take care.